You ever wake up and feel like the world is about to hand you a story you did not audition for? That's how it began for me, a normal life, a steady job, a marriage I thought was ordinary in the best way. And then one blink, $9 million, and everything else rearranged itself around that number. I remember the exact sound Rebecca made when she realized she'd won, a high, trilling little shriek, the kind that splits a quiet evening into before and after. We danced around the living room like children, not yet wise to what money has the power to do to people, to marriages, to the small agreements you think you made in good faith. It felt miraculous, and for a heartbeat it felt like the kind of miracle that cements a bond. But miracles are messy, and this one came wrapped in glossy paper and a fine print that no one tells you about, how swiftly people turn toward the light and forget the hands that held them there. Before the ticket, Rebecca was a force of color and unpredictability, an artist who loved thrift stores and odd coffee shops, someone who could stretch a dollar and make it sing. I was the spreadsheet guy, the man whose love languages were numbers and quiet reliability. That pragmatic streak is what made the conversation about a prenup possible. My father, a careful, quietly persistent man, had handed me the idea like an heirloom best kept in a safe. Son, protect what's yours, he said. It felt awkward, a little like betrayal, but also like wisdom. Rebecca signed the agreement with an eye roll and a dramatic flourish, calling it adult insurance and promising it was only paperwork. I signed because we both laughed about it and because, in the end, love felt bigger than any clause. How naive that sounds now. Love is big, but it is also fragile when tested by other people's definitions of success. When the money landed, life didn't flip overnight into a movie montage of shared dreams. It started as a series of small shifts, ripples that later revealed themselves as a current. Rebecca began to wear clothes that whispered wealth instead of shouted charm. Dinners migrated from our cozy kitchen to places where the portions were fine and the bill was finer. She stopped taking freelance commissions and started saying she needed time to consider new ventures, language that sounded bold but often meant new friends who laughed louder at their own jokes. The house filled with different types of silence, silences that didn't have the same comfortable companionship as before but were full of the sound of two worlds orbiting ever further apart. There were conversations where I tried to anchor us, gentle talks about budgets, future goals, the simple joy of being a team, only to be met with that subtle, dangerous thing, dismissal disguised as freedom. You don't understand, she'd say, not as an invitation to explain but as a soft cord cutting off communication. I felt myself shrinking in those moments, not because I was less, but because the life we had built together was suddenly being evaluated under different criteria. Were we better together? Had the mathematics of affection changed because she held a different ledger now? Those questions simmered in my chest like a slow-burning fuse. The split, when it came, had the sterile efficiency of modern endings, a note left on the counter, a compact suitcase by the door, and a lawyer's email that read calm and definitive. I need my space, she wrote in the note, simple and impenetrable. I remember standing in the kitchen, the morning light cutting through dust motes, feeling as if the world had switched to black and white for a moment. There was no screaming, no cinematic falling apart, just a sense of being erased gently, like someone crossing out lines in a book you thought you were writing together. The lawyer's letter asked for an amicable resolution, which felt like a joke given how removed and clinical everything had become. Then I remembered the paper. The prenup, our awkward, adult safety net, sat folded in a drawer where one keeps things you only need once. I read the clauses again and felt a peculiar cold relief. The contract was not vindictive. It was practical. It declared that assets brought into the marriage remained individual, that separate accounts stayed separate unless explicitly commingled. In the moment she left, this document became the shield I hadn't known I needed and the thing she had shrugged off at laughter and a glass of cheap wine. She had assumed, perhaps, that love would override ink. She didn't account for the fact that legalities, not feelings, often decide who walks away with what. When her lawyer proposed a fair settlement, a phrase designed to make both parties feel civilized, I forwarded the prenup. The silence on the other end of the line was loud. I could almost hear the paper rustle. Rebecca called me furious, the kind of anger that tastes like betrayal because she thought I had turned the joke we both made into a weapon. You're going to hide behind that stupid document? She demanded, voice strained. You knew what you were signing. I stood in the kitchen and watched my own reflection in the kettle and realized our signatures had been earnest, an act of trust that now served as a blunt instrument. It was horrible and tidy all at once. Divorce is a peculiar, bureaucratic kind of heartbreak. There were forms and mediation sessions where you rehearse civility like a play you never wanted to audition for. Everyone told me I was lucky to keep my savings, my modest investments set up by my cautious father. He had always nudged me to be practical in a way that felt stifling at the time but proved prescient. Luck, though, is a word that flattens the emotional landscape into a single, tidy adjective. I didn't feel lucky. I felt hollowed out. The prenup protected my bank account, but it couldn't stitch the raw edges of disappointment back together. It couldn't teach me how to navigate the small betrayals that kept collecting like dust in drawers we used to share. In the months after the divorce, I watched her life from a distance. Social media shows a curated version of reality, and at first, her feed smelled of champagne and luxury, parties, trips, snapshots of laughter that seemed to say, "Look how well I'm doing." But luxury has a surface, and beneath it, there are sometimes caverns of isolation. I heard through mutual acquaintances that money introduced new problems, a cascade of friends who were more like customers of charisma, investments recommended by people who knew how to sell dreams, and a loneliness that expensive things can't buy away. When I accidentally ran into her at a cafe months later, she looked like a different species of tired, not the poor kind of tired, but the exhausted kind that competence and cash can't soothe. We spoke briefly about small things, she admitted, not an apology but in a confession that sounded like relief, that she had misread what money would do for her. "I thought I would feel safer," she said, stirring her coffee as if it could answer for life. She told me about failed ventures and friendships that evaporated when the fun ran out. There was regret in her voice, the particular brand that tastes like late-night infomercials, full of things you wish you had known before the purchase. I felt a complicated surge of something that wasn't quite compassion and wasn't quite vindication. I was not vindicated. I was merely seeing the person I had once loved unravel in a way I could now watch without being pulled into the spin. What surprised me most was not the fallow feeling of an ended marriage but the quiet ways I began to rebuild. There were awkward therapy sessions where I had to teach myself phrases, "This hurt me. I deserve respect. My feelings are valid." Saying those sentences out loud felt like opening a window in a room that had been closed too long. Friends were a scaffolding, a neighbor who brought over lasagna unannounced, coworkers who listened even when I tried to laugh it off, my sister who texted at 2 in the morning to remind me I was not alone. The work of healing was small and improbable. It was in morning runs that turned into conversations, in the dull scrape of a pen across a journal, in a phone call that started with, "How are you?" and ended with hours of honest silence. The prenup remained a stick in the ground. It was not a celebration. It was an instrument of survival. People tagged me in articles about winning prenups as if this were a sport, but protection is not triumph. I felt neither joy nor victory. I felt grateful that I didn't lose my financial life, and I felt the emptiness that accompanies the closing of a door you didn't want to close. The separation taught me about boundaries in practical terms, how to keep what is yours, how to not let the siren song of someone else's choices swallow your own identity. It also taught me a tougher lesson about love, that affection alone doesn't sustain a partnership when the metrics change. Money didn't create the cracks in our marriage, it highlighted them, like putting a flashlight on a crack in a wall so you can no longer claim ignorance. Years later, I can look back with a clearer view of what was transactional and what was true. Rebecca got her 9 million and a lesson in the loneliness of abundance. I kept my accounts and learned how to ask for respect in ways I never had before. There were moments of sorrow, birthdays I spent alone, the odd echo of a song on the radio that reminded me of our early, scrappy dinners, but there were also moments of quiet autonomy, choosing the paint for my living room, taking a trip by myself to a town with a good bookstore, learning how to be content in company that I chose rather than inherited. Meeting Rebecca by chance at that cafe did not close any chapters in cinematic fashion. There was no dramatic reconciliation or bitter exchange, just a truth shared over lukewarm coffee. "I thought it would make everything better," she said, and maybe she meant it. Perhaps that sentence holds more humility than any courtroom ever did. I told her the thing I had learned that felt most like a compass: money can buy things, Rebecca, but it doesn't buy how to be with someone. She nodded, and for a second there was recognition, a mutual seeing of two people who had once tried to craft a life together and discovered that sometimes life is less about winning and more about choosing wisely. If there is a moral to this long and messy story, it is not that prenups are a romantic betrayal or that money is the enemy. The real lesson is that preparation matters and that we must be honest about what we need from the people we love. A prenup, in our case, did not destroy love. It held legal truth when feelings shifted. The thing that hurt me, that left a scar, was not the existence of an agreement but the way someone I trusted stopped recognizing the human terms of our partnership. That is harder to legislate for or sign away. It taught me to value my dignity and to set boundaries that protect not only my bank accounts but my sense of self. In the quiet that followed, I found a different kind of comfort, the one that comes when you stop measuring yourself by someone else's choices. Rebecca got her money and the life she chose. I kept mine and the lessons I'd earned. Sometimes I imagine the life we might have had without the lottery's click, maybe simpler, maybe happier, maybe just different, but imagining is a gentle exercise, not a weapon. I prefer to remember the early days, the thrift store finds, the laughter over burnt toast, because those moments remind me that love's simplest currency is attention, presence, and the daily choice to keep another person visible, not diminished by ambition or cash. When people ask me now whether I regret anything, I say this: I regret the ways I let silence become a refuge instead of a signal. I regret not speaking up sooner, not insisting that respect be non-negotiable, but I do not regret signing the prenup, because practical measures kept me from losing more than I could afford. That document was not an act of mistrust but an act of care for my future self. In the end, the story is not about who got what. It's about how we learned to hold ourselves when others could not. And that, axiomatum, is a lesson that money cannot buy.